There's a storm across the valley. The clouds are rolling in. The afternoon is heavy on your shoulders. There's a truck out on the 4-lane, a mile or more away. The whining of his wheels just makes it colder.
Welcome to Community Forum. Your host today, Priscilla Almquist-Olsen, and I have delighted to introduce you to Marcia Orcutt. And Marcia has written a book called The Light Within My Darkness. She wrote this over several years, and the one I have is a revised version of the original, which was From Darkness to Dawn. Okay, Marcia, welcome. Welcome to Community Forum.
Thank you.
And tell us a little bit about your background and where you came from and grew up and that kind of thing.
Well, thank you so much first for having me here today. I grew up in Derby, Connecticut, a small town known as the Valley. There were 3 towns. We were known as the Valley. I grew up there. I went to college at Trinity College for 2 years in Hartford, Connecticut, and then I transferred to Utica College, which was then a college of Syracuse University. I got a degree in occupational therapy, and then a year after I graduated, I moved up to Braintree, Massachusetts, and I've been up here in Massachusetts ever since, so that's been over 35 years ago.
Well, good. Welcome. So. Now, this is a very personal book, a journey of your, from the very beginnings, the kind of influence that events in your childhood and your parents and so forth, and what impact those events and words and your response to those words and events. So give us a little bit of that and the kind of thing that created the depression in your life and caused the alcoholism initially.
Well, when I was growing up, I had a very difficult upbringing. I was one of 3 sisters, but I actually had a 4th sister who passed away before I was ever born. Mm-hmm. And I was the sister who was born after that sister Mary Ann passed away. According to my therapist, that probably made a big impact on the behavior the way I was brought up, because I was the next person that was born. Mm-hmm. So I actually have 4 sisters, and I'm the middle sister of the 5 of us.
So there were some, I've read most of the book. It's very personal. I think you're very courageous to have actually written up some of the things that most of us would call our deepest secrets, and yet you have written them forthrightly and haven't missed anything that would get in the way of our understanding of where you started and how your journey progressed. So, so tell us a little bit about your relationship with your mother.
I had a very difficult relationship with my mom. When I was growing up, I most times didn't agree with my mom. And I think my sisters often didn't agree, but I was the one who often spoke up. And I often paid the price because I didn't agree with her. I had a lot of things that happened in childhood that I learned. This book really reflects a 13-year period in my life after our second daughter, Sarah, was born. I became very depressed after she was born. And it spanned a 13-year period. And initially it was thought to be postpartum depression, but it actually turned out to be post-traumatic stress disorder. And what happened is a lot of the events that happened in my childhood, I really kind of forgot about. I went through a lot of events, but because they were so traumatic and so unspeakable, as a child, I kind of did what I had to do to just survive and get through them. But my mind just kind of repressed them.
Yes, and that's often, it's interesting because not until an event happened to me did I understand about repression. I was in a car on Memorial Drive in Cambridge, and with my 4-month-old son in the back in a car seat, and I was suddenly I'm trying to turn into a lane to turn around in order to come to the place I was going to, and suddenly I am hit from behind by a car who didn't see me in the turnoff lane. And I was thrust into the passing lane on Memorial Drive with cars speeding and coming. And I looked in the mirror and I saw a car that was just about to hit me. It was so frightening. And somehow that car got in the next lane and didn't hit me. The next day, I was woke up and I'm breastfeeding my child, and suddenly I start crying hysterically. And my husband came in and he said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Well, I suddenly remembered. I had repressed it because it seemed to me that it was a moment of death, not just for me, but for my baby, my little Eric, who's now 45. And but it was quite dramatic, traumatic also. And I understand about repression because those horrible moments, your mind says, no, you're not going to remember this because it's not good for you to remember. And so I understand that. And when you had, so during your growing up years, I understand that your mother was a perfectionist, and I understand that. A lot of us are. But when you came home with a 98 and that wasn't good enough on a test, I thought that was pretty unbelievable. So you got the feeling that you weren't good enough and that you could never please your mom and so forth. And that is because the person that you loved and the person you had most contact with was your mother. And so that's what made it so traumatic.
That was part of it, and the other part was that after I was born, I had learned from my mom that, and I think that as much as she wanted to have me, she wasn't able to hold me and feed me. She told me that I was such a good baby, she was able to put me in the crib and just prop me up with my bottle and go clean the house. And I felt like, oh my gosh, I feel like we never bonded when I was small. I've learned through the years that was pretty common back then, and I understand now as an adult, different than I probably even understood 30 years ago. But as a child, I didn't bond with my mother. As a child, I didn't bond with my mother. I have memories of being in kindergarten and I couldn't go to gym because I was afraid to change. My older sister had to come to get me to go to gym class. I know today that's because I was sexually abused as a child and I couldn't go to gym class. But as a child, I didn't know, I felt so different than other children. And the big thing for me is that I wasn't able to tell anybody. I had these secrets and I didn't understand what was going on. But as a child, I was totally dependent upon my parents. And through years of therapy, I have a better understanding of what had happened. And but even though the memories were repressed for my protection, because I wasn't in a place to deal with the memories, my body didn't forget about it. My mind, my body didn't forget about it. And I needed to seek other ways to deal with it. And what I sought was food. By 7 years old, I was today what you would call anorexic, but this is 55 years ago. And 55 years ago, I would bring my lunches home from school and I would hide them in my closet. One, this was my way to control an uncontrollable situation. And another way is I was trying desperately to get some attention from my father. My father was very withdrawn, very passive. He worked hard. But I was trying so hard to get some attention from my father, and I thought if I was very, very thin, I would stand out from my sisters, that maybe I would excel. I was not going to get 100, or maybe even when I got hundreds, that didn't seem to be good enough. But I thought if I was so thin, maybe my father would notice me and say something encouraging to me. You know, I wanted to sit on his lap and him to read to me, or just hug me, tell me he loved me. But that I didn't get that from my father. You know, unfortunately, I was abused by my father, but I wanted to be held and hugged and told I was loved. So I thought food, oh, this is something, this is going to give me comfort, this is something I can control. But through the years, like with any substance, a substance cannot give me what a person can give me.
Right.
So ultimately that turned on me.
Yeah, and then the anorexia was replaced by alcoholism, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. My first day of college, I picked up alcohol. First, I thought, oh, I've arrived, I'm in college. I thought everybody was drinking, but of course everybody was not drinking. You know, for what had happened to me during childhood, I was still a very sheltered person. My other escape growing up was reading library books, and that for me was a wonderful escape. But I arrived at college and I wasn't a worldly person. I didn't know a lot of things. And I picked up a cup of beer in a red plastic cup, and I thought I've arrived, because it helped me feel like I fit in and belonged. And I certainly didn't drink every day when I was in college, but when I did, you know, it just relaxed me and helped me. It helped me to become who other people wanted me to be. It helped me to feel like a part of. And I, thanks be to God, I drank for 10 years. After college, I really began to drink alcoholically. And much like my dad drank, I worked and I came home and I drank by myself, again in isolation by myself, and I was able to hold a job and everything looked good on the outside, but I was, you know, I was dead on the inside. I knew I wasn't living life the way I was brought up to live my life, and I was ready to kill myself the day before I turned 29, and by the grace of God, I told somebody, and that person told me there was, you know, there were different programs and places I could go to deal with that issue.
So you got married to the love of your life, Stephen, and you had 2 daughters, Emily and then Sarah. And so during those times, you also sought treatment, and your husband was so supportive of that, and all through the years. And when you had setbacks or you weren't so pleasant, he was there to understand and to love you. And even though I know there were moments of tension, as I read in the book, but that's only normal. People are human. But tell me about those shock treatments that were recommended and what the result was of that.
Initially, after Sarah was born, right away I was extremely depressed. I was crying all the time, and the psychiatrist that I was seeing recommended I receive 20 ECT treatments, and I did as an outpatient one a week. Somewhere along the way, one of the treatments went extremely wrong,
and the result was that some of those memories that the treatments were supposed to expose were further repressed. Is that correct?
Well, I think what happened is I ended up more depressed than when I started, but I learned, in years past that, the purpose of the ECT treatments, one of the reasons was to try to, I was just so depressed, the professionals were trying to do anything they could to try to help me. Initially, the doctors thought I had postpartum depression because I became so depressed after Sarah was born. But I learned afterwards that one of the purposes for ECT treatments is to try to erase some of repressed memories. But what happened for me is a lot of my other memory got erased. Oh. For example, we moved probably 6 years after we were married, and we moved to another house. And I have absolutely no memory of looking for houses and then moving to the new house. In fact, one day I said to Emily and Sarah, "Oh, whose kitchen is this?" And they said, "Mommy, this is our kitchen. We live here." And I had absolutely no memory of living there. Or things like that would happen. Or I would look at pictures with the girls and I'd be like, "Oh, where is this?" And they'd say, "Oh, we went there on vacation camping. Don't you remember being there?" And I would have no memory of being there.
So there were very negative effects from that shock treatment.
There was for me, but
For you.
I know today that ECT treatments have come a long way. And so I think for me, they were very, they were very scary. I don't remember the first couple ones, but the ones I do remember, they were, I had to be dropped off and I went through them by myself and I was very scared. And I felt like I had lost my dignity as a person. Just going through, I was very scared and I didn't understand what was going on. And depression by itself is very scary. You feel like you're, looking at the world like you're under the ground and everything is gray or black, and it's very hard to understand, explain it to somebody, because on the outside my life looked wonderful again. I had a home, I had a husband, I had 2 children. I had a profession that I eventually lost, and my sisters or my mother or just other people might say, "Well, what have you got to be depressed about?" And I had nothing on the outside world to be depressed about, but it was inside. I was depressed. I was clinically depressed. It wasn't, "Oh, I just felt upset because I lost something." I was really depressed, clinically depressed.
Yeah. Now, we have all heard about Mike Wallace and his description of his clinical depression. And so I think he did wonders for people to understand that it's something that can happen to anyone, even somebody like Mike Wallace. And so people kind of looked at that and said, well, and there was much more of an acceptance for depression. And so I think that has helped. You're writing this book, and the journey that you describe here was also very therapeutic for you, wasn't it?
Oh, it definitely was. I sat down to write it, and actually I started to write what happened. My therapist, who passed away, had the same therapist for at least 16 years. He said, "You might, I think you really should just write about your story. I think you can help people by writing it." And I thought, "Oh, yeah, sure." But I said, "Well, maybe I will." So I went to a writers group at a library in Halifax, where I lived at the time, and I started to write. And after going for maybe 2 months, the group wanted to hear what I'd written, and I was like, "Oh, no." So I read very quietly what I had written, and they said, "Speak up, speak up." So I started, but it was very personal. It was very difficult to share. But afterwards, the room was quiet, and I was like, "Oh, boy." And people just, somebody shared about somebody in their family who had a different type of mental illness, and somebody else shared about their mom who had postpartum depression. Somebody else shared about themselves. And they said, "Oh, I hope you come back next month and you write some more." And I was just shocked. People were very supportive. And the little that I had written had done what I had hoped the book maybe would do, is to just help people just look at what lay in their own heart. Like, that mental illness, I had realized throughout these years that a lot of people have different people in their family, or mental illness happens to a lot of people, but mental illness, even during the time that I was getting treatment, a lot of times it's misunderstood, or sometimes it's difficult to get treatment, or that sometimes there's just not adequate treatment, or just that people treated me with kindness and with love. And even though I didn't often respond for a lot of years, 13 years was a very long time, but people didn't give up on me. And a lot of times people didn't have the answer, and I think that sometimes that's the problem, is people, even like with my husband, there wasn't anything he could do to fix me, but just being kind to me and compassionate and being willing to be present with me, and realizing that I wasn't, sometimes there's nothing you can do to fix it, but just be willing to be open to listen to the person, and be willing to embrace their pain.
Right.
You know, it's very painful.
And
it's
also
just painful.
to always present a loving and comforting nature, so that you had that enormous love from your husband and understanding. So I think one of the things that I have gotten from the book is how people who are in the family or in the social setting, how they can respond positively to somebody who is in a state of depression. And I think that's a wonderful gift that you've given, but also the fact that you have opened up yourself to show people some of the behaviors, some of the fears, some of the thoughts, and so they can reflect on themselves, people in their family, and understand that that perhaps somebody has a mental illness that needs to be recognized, and for that person to get treatment. Those people can help. They can be helpful to somebody who is in a state of depression. Don't you agree?
Oh, it's definitely. I mean, one of the big things about being depressed is I felt totally by myself. And how do I explain this? You know, it was very difficult for me to explain it. And I was looking around for books because I was a big book reader, and that was my companion growing up. But it was difficult for me to find books to read about it other than clinical books. And so, and the other thing was just trying to, you know, initially I didn't understand I had PTSD. But when the memories came back about, the repressed memories came back about that piece, that's when my depression turned around, and that's when my recovery really turned around. And when those memories came back, not just from, you know, a family member, but with a boyfriend in college, I wasn't happy about the memories, but I was so tired of I was kind of like treading water. I didn't really get too far in my recovery, but when the professionals suspected there was something like that in my background because of the symptoms I had and my behaviors. But I wasn't in a place yet, I think, where I could deal with it. But when I was ready, I think God knows when I was ready. When I was ready and I remembered, my daughters were really, that bond with my daughters is what really got me out of bed every morning. My therapist kept saying to me, I don't know anybody who's as depressed as you who gets up out of bed every morning. And it was my daughters. It was the bond with my daughters that got me out of bed. I might have gone back to the couch during the day, but when they got home, I was up.
Yeah.
I may not have been, you know.
So tell me today, what do you hope that this book will do for people? And take a look, the light within my darkness. All right, and one of those lights, or two of those lights, were your daughters. The other one, your husband, and then some of the people in Halifax who.
They were definitely a light. Was my therapist who went above and beyond to be there for me.
Yes, and his name was Don, and I read so much about him and how wonderful he was, and how he was the one who got you out of the darkness at some point.
He was. I think what I'm hoping the book would do is that I think no matter how dark things were for me, you know, I ended up back in the mental hospital at least 6 times that I can remember. It was many more times than that. And since I wrote this book, more memories have come back to me, and I've been back to the hospital sometimes. But I'm not ashamed of that today, and I'm not ashamed of my past today, and I'm not ashamed of who I am anymore. And I wasn't ashamed to put my name to the book because, you know, what I'm hoping is that it will help people know that they're not alone. For most of my life, I thought I was alone with things that had happened to me, or the way that I thought, or how I felt. And I realized through this journey, I think of it as a journey, I realized that people cared about me. People were there for me. Most of all, God was there for me. I developed a relationship with people instead of relationships with substances. And today, you know, I lost things during this journey, but what I gained was so much more important. And it's one thing to say I'm depressed or to say I was abused or certain things happened to me, but I need to take responsibility for things in my life today and look at things that I've done. But I also need to look at what I'm going to do about it and what kind of person, woman, mother, wife, friend I'm going to be. And
so your therapy has helped you to take responsibility for your life.
For me. And I feel like I was, God allowed me to go through all this and to still be here so that maybe I can share, the good news, the hope with other people that, there is an answer.
Mm-hmm. Well, this book has truly given people not just a story about your journey, but perhaps enlighten people about the journey of depression. And I think that's so very important. And Marcia Orcutt, I want to thank you very much for being my guest today on Community Forum and for this wonderful book, The Light Within My Darkness. And where can people get this book?
I have a website, marciaorcutt.com. The book is available through there. You can order it there. And
what's your website?
That is my website, marciaorcutt.com. I also have a professional Facebook page, so it's available there.
Okay, and we're going to put that up on the screen. Marcia is spelled M-A-R-C-I-A, Orcutt, O-R-C-U-T-T. So you can get access to
Thank you. And I just want to say one thing is that this is my experience and strength and hope, and it's not a recipe for recovery. It's just how, it's just like what worked for me. Mm-hmm. It's definitely not a how-to book.
Right. And so we appreciate so much your being here and sharing your story, and for the endless hours that it took for you to reveal your journey by writing this book. So I encourage you all to take a look at The Light Within My Darkness by Marcia Orcutt. And thank you very much for being my guest today, Marcia, and all the best to you. I know you're on the best journey of your life at this time.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. And to my guests, viewers at home, I hope you've enjoyed this Community Forum interview. And until next time, be well.